Welcome to the Association of Design Education webinar. We are thrilled to have with us this month Brian Short of the Sewing Loft of Avon, and we actually got an extra Benny. His wife Rachel is with us as well, and they will be talking to us, although Rachel did say Brian would be the star of the show, but Brian will be talking to us about avoiding the pitfalls, installing customer window treatments, and a workroom's perspective. Welcome, Brian and Rachel.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ann.
You're welcome. Delighted you all could join us, and what a great topic.
Yeah, we're really excited about this topic. You know, we have found that that this is something that designers really like about what we do with regards to kind of being a guide and doing some advising for them when it comes to custom window treatment. So let me just start first. I just want to say hi to everyone that's on this webinar and to thank you so much for taking your time out of what I'm sure is a very busy schedule to listen to what we have to say. We really do appreciate that. And we really also want to thank the Association of Design Education, and in particular Ann Anderson, for giving us this really amazing opportunity to present this webinar and to speak to all of you today about how a workroom can be your secret weapon for avoiding potential costly pitfalls and selling more custom window treatments. So let's begin. Yes, everyone, the slide transition is a curtain being drawn. I have to say, I searched high and low for a good transition, and when I found this, you can even ask my wife if you ever talked to her. I was almost giddy with joy. So I don't know what that says about me in my life, but I'm happy about it.
I think it's a great touch. It's a great touch.
Brian was very excited. So you guys are the debut of curtain transition.
Wonderful.
All right. So who are we? My wife and I, Rachel, own the Sewing Loft of Avon. We are a collaborative workroom located in Avon, Connecticut, which is an essential part of the state, but we service the entire state. My wife has been sewing for 20 years, but we started this business formally in 2010. We work with several really great interior designers and provide fabrication services to design stores like Ethan Allen and fabrication services to Ethan Allen and Calico Corners. And the one really kind of cool thing we did some this year, as well as we were approached by a retail store who was looking to expand their services into the custom window treatment market, moving themselves from semi-custom to full custom. And actually asked us to come to their workroom and provide some, consulting advice in order to help them fabricate their window treatments better. So that was really thrilling for us. It was the first time that we kind of did some consulting services. So as I said, we tend to take what's called a collaborative approach to our custom fabrication services. And what this means is that we take a very proactive and we provide proactive guidance on potential issues during both the design and the fabrication stages. And what we find is this really not just helps the designer create a product that meets their client's needs or that they really like, but it also helps them manage their clients' expectations, which is actually something that's really, really important. And it's important because what we have found is that many designers have kind of a love-hate relationship with custom window treatments. They love it because it's a really beautiful finishing touch to a design project. The clients get really excited and at the install, and they anticipate what their house is going to look like. And they tell their friends, what a great job that they did. And also, designers love the income stream. Unlike some furniture that you might get, you know, clients really can't find out what the pricing is, to be somewhat blunt about it. So you're able to get a nice markup off of custom window treatments, and it's something completely unique that you can do for your client. But the hate comes in with the frustrating mistakes that can be made. And we all know these mistakes aren't just frustrating, but they're costly because things have to be fixed. The rods are too wide, or the draperies don't stack properly, or maybe when they should be breaking, they're puddling, or when they should be just scraping the floor, they're breaking. That cuts into the profit margins, and it can create a client management nightmare. Even though you may have a great client, it's never fun to have that conversation with a client that something has to be fixed. So the common solution that most designers do, they keep it simple, or they stop doing custom window treatments and maybe move to something, like a Hunter Douglas type of product. But the way we look at it is the profitable solution is to engage a collaborative workroom as your partner and as your guide in order to avoid these types of pitfalls. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about how to engage your workroom in a collaborative fashion in the design phase of your project and in the fabrication phase. And at the end, we're going to try to, hopefully I won't be too talkative, just give us a couple of tips of how to use your workroom to actually help you sell more window treatments. So let's jump right into the design phase. So why engage your workroom at this stage of the process? Now, some designers don't do that, and they'll just send the specs to their workroom and really get them involved once once the fabrication begins. But what we have found is that designers that engage their workroom at this stage, they tend to be able to, manage their clients' expectations better, avoid potential pitfalls and potential problems. And this is a very critical stage. This is when you're setting your clients' expectations, excitement grows. If you bring your workroom in at this point, they can really recognize potential issues and provide the appropriate guidance and manage clients' expectations. And a really good example of managing expectations, or when expectations weren't managed, we did a project and we were brought in just for the fabrication phase. The designer had used photos of Italian stringing that used we used silk fabric, which was very flowy, very loose, a very kind of elegant look. But the fabric that they chose was a cotton fabric.
So it was like a kind of like a tight weave, heavier cotton with embroidery. So as you all know, I'm sure, that's going to hang completely differently than silk. So it looked a lot different in real life than in a photo that they showed their client. So our advice would be there to use the same fabric in your photo if for something like that. And stop me if you don't know this already, but Italian stringing is kind of like what they do in theaters and ballrooms. They, it draws back the drapery panel high, and it's kind of at an angle, very elegant, but it's very complicated. And having the fabric look different in the photo than the actual is going to really change the entire look of the window treatment, which might be a surprise to the end client.
Yeah, exactly. So
what do you think the critical stage is then? I mean, is it the designer may have met with the client, talked about potential treatments, and then maybe bring you in or talk to you at that point, so to make sure that what they're talking about is feasible? I'm just kind of curious where you think that might be a good idea.
Yes, actually, that's very good. We have found the best results has been once the designer gets an idea of what the client wants and has some options, not just design, but also with fabric. that's a really good point then to sit down with your workroom and discuss, is the fabric going to work with this type of treatment? What is it going to look like? And your workroom can even get into fairly good specifics as far as what the stack is going to look like. If your client wants something that's going to stack all the way off the window, your workroom can advise you on, well, this is how much stack there is going to be, or this type of fabric is not appropriate for the application, or it's perfect for the application.
And it's also I would say the earlier you can get your workroom in, the better, so that if you've got an idea that you want to present to your client, before you put in time, and as we all know, time is money, especially when you're billing, and if you want to keep your hours down and you don't want to redo, the earlier you get us in before you present, or excuse me, your workroom, before something's presented to the client, that way you can avoid presenting something that might not be feasible, that might not be doable, or you get confirmation, which is, some relief that, yeah, that's absolutely feasible. Here's what we can do to make it look even better. Here's some suggestions, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the key is avoiding having to go back to your client and say, actually, this won't work.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one other quick example, a designer pulled us in for an in-home consultation at the client's home, and they wanted to do a Roman shade. Roman shades are very functional and they're very beautiful, but if you have a very large window, when that Roman shade is down, you're going to have a big wall of fabric, and you may have seams as well. And so we were able to discuss that with the designer, and the designer then came up with a hobbled shade so that when it's down, you still have those folds and some interest. So those are just some of the things that that your workroom can kind of let what's a good way to go. And like I said, it's just guidance. I mean, you know your client better than anyone else. So the other reason why, and we kind of touched on this, you provide guidance on design options and creative solutions. And what we really kind of mean by that is, especially here in New England, there are houses, especially in the old houses, have very thick molding. Some of the new houses have very thick moldings. They can be drafty. There are ways that your workroom is essentially an expert in window treatments. They see them all the time. So they really can help you work around certain architectural problems or challenges that a house may have. We worked with a house that had very thick crown molding and molding on top of the windowsill. On top of the window. So there's probably about an inch of space. So hardware really wasn't going to work because there just wasn't enough space to connect the hardware. So since the client just wanted stationary panels and they had a very kind of contemporary feel to the house, we came up with a solution of simply mounting the draperies to a 1x4 so that they had a very floating look to them, which was a very contemporary look. It really went with the style that the client was going after, but it cost less because they didn't have to deal with hardware. And it also, the 1x4 was able to fit perfectly in that small 1-inch space between the crown molding and the molding on top of the window. So, when you have those architectural challenges in a house, definitely bring your workroom. That's a great time to bring your workroom in. The other thing here is that when it comes to options, window treatment vendors market to workrooms all the time, which means when new products are coming out, a lot of times they actually will employ a workroom to actually spread the word about it. They will do seminars at workrooms, invite other workrooms because they know we have access to designers. So a good example is a company called DoFix just came out this year or late last year with a Roman shade lift system that has an auto descend feature, which means you tug on the back of the cord, and the shade descends all on its own. And you can stop it at certain points. It's a really great feature that the designers are really liking. Our clients are really love them. But we found that out because DoFix engaged a workroom to market it for them. We went to a seminar at a workroom in New York. It was all marketed to workroom people. That's how we found out about it, and that's how they debuted it. So, your workroom hardware companies, different fabric companies really kind of go after workrooms to really market their stuff. So you can really get some new kind of cool, straight, new to the market ideas and products from your workroom.
And I think that's, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rachel.
I was just going to say that an added benefit to that, when you've got new products like, for instance, this lift rail system, your clients who are your custom clients, they're going to love that they're the only ones out there that have this. So if your workroom can bring you these cool new things or new techniques, even new window treatment designs or options, you can market to your client that, hey, this is so truly custom, your neighbor's not going to have this. We're the only ones that can get it for you.
Yep. Exactly.
And I think it's also, as a designer who doesn't often, window treatments are not my primary focus by a long shot. I think it's really important to have access to what's the latest, because I for sure am not going to know that. So, I would want my workroom to be able to tell me. I mean, that's a wonderful benefit. What are the really cool things happening? I don't know.
And that's where your workroom is. That's what we consider part of our service. We're here to bring that to you so that you can bring more benefit to your clients and everybody ends up making more money.
Yep. And so, and the other thing too is, even when new products come out, there are thousands of workrooms across this country, but we are all a very kind of close-knit community, and there are some very active industry forum boards and conferences and groups that a lot of workrooms like us are a part of. And so the great thing is if a new product comes out, we go on those boards and say, hey, has anyone tried out X or Y product? What do you think? And we can get a very objective analysis of whether or not the product is great or it's not. And so we can, do kind of that vetting for you. So, that's another good thing about a very collaborative workroom.
And one of the things I'll just touch on that Brian said, our group, our community of workrooms, they're incredibly, it's non-competitive. Everybody's in it together, and that's a huge focus for the workroom industry. So when someone says this doesn't work or this does work, we trust that because they're out there doing the same things we're doing, and they want to help grow with the workroom industry. So it's a really good resource that we can bring back to you, or your workroom can bring back to you.
Yeah. All right. So now that you've decided or determined, okay, I want to get my workroom in this process quickly, I want to know what's new to the market, I want to get them to help me out. Then what you have to do is kind of really determine the best way to collaborate with your workroom. So, there's I'm going to list 3 ways that I can think of, but obviously, every workroom is different and your relationship with your workroom is different. So one way is at the client space, an in-home consultation. So what are the pros of that? The workroom gets firsthand knowledge of the space and potential issues. They can be there on the spot and give you guidance right there. Immediate answers to the client's questions. You've got the expert right there. You got the guide right there. You can really, go back and forth and get those answers for that client. So you have to go back and forth. Guidance on the appropriate fabrics. Once again, not all fabrics are great for all applications. And not just the fabric, but whether or not it should be lined and interlined. We have come across instances where a designer may not want to interline a valance, but if there's a lot of light that's going to come through that window, that light could wash out the actual pattern of the fabric, and it won't look, and you have like and you'll see the seams and you'll see the difference of where it's hanging on the window and where it's above the window. if you interline, a lot of times you can kind of reduce that effect. And so that's something that your workroom, will be able to advise you on. However, there are some cons to this. So usually there's a consultation fee. A workroom's time is valuable. So a lot of times they may charge you a travel fee or a hourly fee. And, depending on your client, some clients may question your expertise. We haven't had that happen. We haven't seen that. Although I do know that when we have done this, a lot of designers will want us to maybe speak to them in private or out of earshot with the client, so that, and to be discreet, so that, the designer continues to be the expert in the room. But, and the other thing, and some designers have this issue of whether or not if you expose the workroom to your client, whether or not the client will then go to that workroom and bypass them, cut out the middleman. It is unfortunate that I have heard stories of that happening, but I can tell you, most workrooms, us included, are professionals. This is our business, it's our livelihood, and it just doesn't make business sense for us to do something like that, to steal a client to get, one job when, the designer is going to give us multiple jobs for years to come.
Aside from it being ethically and morally inappropriate, to even take out the morals and ethics of doing something like that, it just does not work from the business side. And Brandon's right. There's a whole host of issues that reputable, good workrooms, they'll be upfront with you and say, I would never do that. They'll sign something if you want them to sign something. But the good workrooms out there aren't going to do that to you.
Yeah. And to be honest, there have been times where designers have literally left us at the install and let us run the install with the client there. And to be completely upfront, does the client come to us and say, hey, I'm thinking about my dining room next. What do you think? Our standard line is always go to your, talk to your designer about it. They'll work it out for you. And then we will actually go to the designer and say, hey, just to let you know, your client is looking to do more work in an additional part of their room. It might be something that you want to talk to them about. So, so moving on from that, to continue on the best ways, you can go to the workrooms, the actual workroom. This is designers have had a lot of success with this. The great thing is you have access to the workroom's resources. The workroom has the resources there, samples, hardware samples, different books, catalogs they might have received from conferences that they've gone to, samples of the actual treatments, lots of different books that you can, maybe even show your client later on. So, and there's no consultation fee generally because it's right there at the workroom. The downside, you don't really get a visual of the client's space unless you bring photos, but, the workroom may not be able to get a really good sense of the space. If it's not that complicated an issue, that's probably not that really won't be an issue. And also it's a big chunk of your time. Your time is money as well. So those are just some things to consider. And the last way is, wrong way. I just like seeing that effect. So, I may do that a couple more times. So this is something that we have recently been doing to pretty good effect, a virtual consultation. We've been using FaceTime with designers. So while they're at their client's house, we have a way for them to schedule time with us, or they can even shoot us a text saying, hey, I'm going to be at my client's place at X time. I would love to do a virtual consultation. So it really is the best of all worlds. Your workroom gets a visual analysis of the space and potential issues. You get immediate answer to your questions, guidance. The workroom has access to the materials at the exact same time. And so it's really a great way.
And also nobody has to charge additional fees. It's really essentially a phone call, as you know, with FaceTime. And we had one designer who did this with us. We've had several do it now, but literally float me around the room on his phone. So I got kind of like a panoramic 360-degree view of everything in the room, and I was able to see and actually address a couple of issues that would come up, and we were able to work them out on the spot, so nobody's out any extra time other than a phone call.
Yeah. So it's if your workroom is willing to use that technology, it can be really, really great. So what are common pitfalls that we have seen? One of the major pitfalls that we have seen is when designers are trying to figure out what the long point for top treatments are. Obviously, the rule is to keep it proportional. And we know a lot of designers kind of use, a tape measuring ruler and kind of eye it. Well, we're workrooms, so we love formulas. We love anything that makes our job easier and faster. So what we use whenever a designer asks us what we think about the long point for a cornice or a valance is the rule of fifths and sixths. Essentially, the long point needs to be between 1/5 and 1/6 of the floor to ceiling measurement. So basically, you divide the ceiling measurement by 5, then you divide it by 6, and that's your range of proportionality. So a lot of times it'll come up between 15 and 18 inches. So if your long point of your cornice is somewhere between that, then you're good. And it kind of takes the guesswork out of it, out of trying to find that long point. And so that's one of the things that, if something is out of proportion, the client's eye will definitely see it. So that's one thing that a common pitfall that we have seen some designers make.
That is great. That is great.
That's a good tip, isn't it? We love that one.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea, and I have been doing this for years.
And I will tell you, it works.
Yep.
It really works.
That's great.
Yeah.
That might just be a helpful quick thing when you're on site trying to figure out, show your client how deep it's going to be, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, yeah.
At any rate.
Absolutely.
So the other common pitfall is when it comes to the finished length for draperies. And, generally speaking, you come up with your finished length, you have, maybe 8 to 10 inches of space between the ceiling and the top of the window. So your installer can kind of fiddle around with that space to make sure it's it's not puddling too much or it's breaking properly. But what we have found is the problem tends to occur when there's very little space between the ceiling and the window molding. So that's when you really have to be precise because there's very, very little wiggle room. So things that we have found that that for designers to consider is the rod diameter, the bracket drop. How far down is the scoop in the bracket where that rod is going to sit? That makes a big difference. And
also, I can interject where the bracket is going to be mounted. Oftentimes, the brackets can be deeper or taller than you might expect, and so you're going to have to mount them lower. The brackets can really steal some of that wall room, especially if you've got a rod with a finial. You're going to need room to put that rod and the finial in the bracket, and you can't mount it just below the ceiling because your finial won't fit, even if you screw your finial on after the fact. So those things, the brackets can really throw things out of whack.
Yeah. And we all know we try to mount, window treatments as high to ceiling as possible, but Rachel's absolutely right. Those brackets can lower that window treatment, those draperies, further than you expect. And the big thing, the rings. A lot of times, we run into where designers will forget about considering how far down the rings are going to make the drapery hang. And there's only so much you can do with the drapery pins in order to compensate for that. But, if you're thinking that it's just going to graze the floor, just be above the floor, and the rings are dropping you an inch or more down, well, then you have a problem and your client's not going to be happy. So always remember the rings and the fabric. I'm
sorry to interrupt for just a second. Back to the rings and the hardware. One of the ways that this has been avoided in the past is to have your installer install your hardware first and then get the floor to ring measurement, and then you can determine finish length from that. That would require an additional fee unless you're comfortable hanging the finished drapery panel. But a lot of people, when the space is tight, will have the hardware put in first so that they can avoid a costly redo in the finish length.
Very good point. And so the next thing about the finish length, the fabric that's being used on the draperies. Linens will grow and shrink. I'm sure a lot of you know that. 100% linen. I just heard this didn't happen to us, but I heard a story very recently. A lady she's a designer that specializes in window treatments. I was talking to her, and she said they were installing 100% linen draperies in a house in August, and it was incredibly humid. And by the time they were done, and they were just supposed to just graze the floor, by the time they were done, they had grown another 2 to 3 inches because of the humidity and the moisture in the air. So here you are, your client's excited about this beautiful linen fabric that they've picked out, and linen also is not cheap at times. And they just want it, and you get to the install, and they're now puddling when they should be just barely grazing. So really be careful with that.
Nightmare.
Weave fabrics. We had a install. We're working with the designer, and she picked a heavy loose weave fabric for traversing draperies. And we could tell immediately once we saw the fabric that it was going to stretch. Just the weight of gravity was going to stretch it out. So we actually, after we fabricated them, the night before the install, in order to try to get some of the growth out, we actually removed draperies that we had hanging and hung the client's draperies from our rods overnight to try to just get some of that stretch out of them. And it was a good thing we did too, because they grew by about an inch. So once again, that's one of the things that we've noticed, and you should always be careful of and that's one thing that your workroom can help you with is how will this fabric react to the actual window treatments.
And on top of that, I can give you another rule of thumb: never use linen for traversing panels, because it can change. It can shrink up in the winter. The side hems can pucker. So generally, as a common practice, linen is gorgeous, but it needs to be treated with kid gloves. So what we always recommend is to use them for stationary panels and maybe incorporate a break, which means they're on the floor by about an inch. That way, when they grow and shrink, the client's not going to notice it as much.
Yeah.
So
what about using a linen look? Does that cheapen things, you think, or would that be a possible solution?
Absolutely a possible solution. Some linen blends or faux linens are gorgeous. You can't tell from the real thing. They can often be expensive, but most often they're not. I know that Kravet has a terrific line of faux linens. And if you've got a linen blend, 25%, you'll probably okay. The higher you get up in your blend, the more issues could arise. I would say they likely won't, but if you're getting up to like 60% and above with your linen, where there's more linen than other, then the possibility for issues to arise increases.
Yeah. And, just to go back on linen and the next section about pitfalls is about problematic fabrics and other things, but just to go back, one of the reasons why you want to if you're going to use linen or something that's 100% linen, one of the reasons to get your workroom involved at the very beginning is that lots of linens need to be hand stitched. And the reason why you want to hand stitch them is so that if they do grow or shrink, the hand stitching gives some flexibility for that movement to happen with a minimal amount of puckering along the side seams. So if you hand stitch it, those stitches are so close. I'm sorry, for hand stitching, they're far enough apart. Whereas a machine stitch is going to be really close together. Hand stitching gives that flexibility. As many of you probably already know, hand stitching is more expensive, and a lot of times with additional charge. So it's good to get those charges out front at the beginning of the process when your client is happy and excited and thrilled, as opposed to, later on in the process when you finally when the workroom finally gets the linen fabric, and they have to then add a surcharge for hand stitching, and then you've got to go back to your client and say, hey, it's going to be more expensive than what we initially talked about. So that's a really great reason. So moving to other common pitfalls, people probably think we hate linen, but we really don't. Linen is beautiful. So we've kind of talked about linen being problematic. Once again, be careful of loose weaves because, like you said, they can be heavy and they can shift. Silks are really beautiful. They do have to be hand stitched. So, that is an extra charge. Once again, that's something that would be great to build into the cost right at the beginning. For bedding, silks are difficult. You can.
Well, actually, I'll interject. In that silks show up any little flaw of skin. If your skin has a piece of moisturizing cream on it, or oil or anything, it's going to show up on your silk. And you obviously in your bedding, things are going to transfer to the bedding itself, and silk will show that. Silk also puckers like crazy. So a lot of bedding, like duvet covers, is often welted around you've got welding on the outer edges or a zipper. Silks can be very non-receptive to welt and also to zippers. And also just in general, if it's going to be a guest bedroom that gets zero use, you might be okay. But again, any soil, any dust, any dirt, any sort of oily or creamy particle is going to show up and it just won't come out.
Yeah. And the other thing too is silk is very susceptible to the damaging rays of the sun. So if you use bedding in a place that gets a lot of sun, that silk is going to start to deteriorate over time. And upholstery fabrics for bedding, we have run across this where sometimes designers may forget that, this is something that a comforter or something might be something that's going to be laying on top of a person, and it could be very heavy. This didn't happen. One of the managers at one of the Ethan Allen stores told us, that this is something that did actually happen where, the designer used a very heavy upholstery fabric, and once it was installed, it was just way too heavy for the client to sleep under. And they had to bring it back and redo it. So, that's something to really keep in mind. And embroideries. Embroideries are beautiful, but they can be uneven at times.
They're often and this is probably something you already know, but an embroidery, it's done on what's called a base cloth. So you've got your base cloth and then your pretty floral embroidery or whatever design it is that you have, because it's not a linear fabric. It's not a linear process. It's not like printing a pattern on a fabric. So it's not each design is not going to be exactly like the other embroidered design on the fabric, which often means that if you're trying to join widths, say in bedding or say in drapery panels, so that you can get a wider piece out of it, a lot of times the embroidery won't match up because embroideries just tend to be uneven like that. So generally an embroidery is good for something that doesn't need to be seamed or pieced. And don't get us wrong, all these fabrics are gorgeous. It's just that some work better, obviously, in some applications than others. If your client finds an embroidery that they like and they really want to do something with it, consult your workroom, because they can probably find a way to get that fabric in there, or suggest, hey, why don't you drop it down to stationary panels? Or why don't you just do a scaldino, like a little folded over coverlet at the end of the bed, some ways to get that fabric in there so the client's happy and it's not done, improperly.
Yep. And also just to reiterate too, we're not saying don't use any of these fabrics. What we're really just saying is, engage your workroom if you're going to be using, certain fabrics, so that you both can collaborate and come to a solution that meets your client's expectations, and you can manage your client's expectations. The other one here, we touched on this earlier. If you're going to use a photo as a visual aid, make sure that the fabric that you're using for the final product is similar to the fabric that was used in the photo, because different fabrics look different and act different with different treatments. So if your client is thrilled about this beautiful photo in Veranda magazine, and they're using a silk or a pure linen or something like that, a velvet's going to act differently. A cotton's going to look different. So, that we've seen a couple of times. In your workroom, can do what they can do, but fabric is fabric. So, those are just some common pitfalls. Moving along, I'm just kind of checking the time here. So just really, kind of quickly here on some of the fabrication phase of how you can get your workroom engaged in the fabrication phase, or how a workroom can help you in the fabrication phase. What we like to say is your workroom should be your second set of eyes. During the fabrication, you can't see the fabric, you're not around. It's your workroom's job to really inform you if there's any issues with that fabric. So some workrooms, like us, will receive fabric directly from the manufacturer. We tend to have our designers send the fabric directly to us. And because they do that, we're able to check for flaws and defects immediately, and to make sure that the fabric yardage is the same that's on the work order. This means that if there are flaws, if there are rips, if there are snags, and yes, we've seen this, if the fabric is in two pieces, you'll know immediately. And yes, and this is not like, and this was from a very reputable distributor, name brand distributor and manufacturer. It was in two pieces. So, you're able to have those conversations with your client about, hey, we need to get new fabric, or, we need to change something, but you can have that up front if your workroom is giving you this information immediately. Also, this is a good opportunity for the workroom to cross-check your work orders with the other submitted specs. Because, hey, look, you guys are busy, especially this time of year. You've got clients, down your back. You have families you need to run as well. You got a lot of stuff going on, and maybe you transpose a number or two. If your workroom is checking your work orders with your, diagrams and measurements that you submitted along with that work order, they can cross-check that. I mean, we had one experience where a designer, sent us the work order. Supposed to be inside mount Roman shades. Rachel checked the work order, checked the measurement specs, and realized that the inside measurement and the outside window measurement were exactly the same. That's impossible.
Uh-oh.
So, we were then able to, Rachel then called the designer and said, hey, which one is this? Is this the inside or is the outside? And because the designer then, double checked after Rachel called him, he actually discovered that he made a mistake on the finished length as well. So, those are some things that your workroom can kind of, get your back on. because those kind of mistakes are easy to happen if you're a really busy designer. They can also suggest some fabrication adjustments. We had one where a designer was doing another Roman shade with a plaid pattern, and the way the pattern fell, if there was literally an eighth of an inch of additional wiggle room, or a quarter
on each side.
Thank you. A quarter inch of wiggle room each side, we could have gotten the pattern to work perfectly, exactly the way the fabric should be used. And so, we called the designer, and she, looked at her specs, talked to the installer, and realized, okay, yeah, we've got some wiggle room. So we were able to. Now, that being said, if we had fabricated the way the work order said, they've still been fine. The client probably wouldn't know, and probably still doesn't know. But that being said, your workroom is there to make sure that you get the best product possible. So, if you have a workroom like that, they can, when it's on the table, kind of give you some advice on how to really make the most out of that fabric pattern and make it really beautiful for your client.
So I've had a couple of questions come in. If I
Sure,
just
absolutely.
Interject because they relate. One is, do workrooms carry their own fabrics? You've been talking a lot about the fabrics and so forth. Do you all have your own fabrics, or do typical workrooms carry fabrics, or is that something that the designer is responsible to find?
That's a very, very good question. Many workrooms, including us, do carry our own fabrics. So if the designer either doesn't have fabric or can't find a fabric in their stash that they like, many workrooms will have accounts with different fabric places. I mean, we have accounts with Greenhouse. We have accounts with Robert Allen, Kravet, Sombrella, Maxwell. And those are just the ones that we have in our workroom. We also have accounts with other places. We also have an account at the design center here in Hartford, which means that we then have access to, pretty much any fabric that's out there. So yeah, so definitely a lot of workrooms will carry fabrics.
And then another question is, do workrooms measure and install? You've mentioned, I think, designers turning in, the measurements to you, and so maybe they measure and then you install, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it really, it kind of depends on the workroom sometimes, but generally what we have seen is, for most cases, the designer will have their own separate installer, someone who is a professional installer that can make sure that everything's installed properly. And a lot of times they'll have that installer take the measurements. Now, for certain complicated jobs where you really want your workroom in there because of the molding, like, for instance, a great example is arched door or arched windows. It's a perfect example. Like, that's something where you will want your workroom to go and actually make a template, do the actual measurements, because in something that's that complicated, the workroom is actually working out the fabrication process as they're taking the measurements. So that's something. So if you have something that's complicated like that, or you have, different soffits and beams and thick molding, you may want to have your workroom do that. But generally speaking, it's the installer that'll measure. But yeah, the workroom, if you want your workroom to measure, a lot will do that.
And so most often we've found that it's best for whoever's installing the draperies to do the measurements, because they know what they're doing. They're familiar with things like brackets and rings. So they'll have a much more precise idea of how not only they're going to install it, there might be some problems with the plaster that we don't know about. And so they'll be able to get the appropriate measurements. to the designer and to us. Again, as Brian said, if something needs to be done like a template, that's best for your workroom to do. Also, your workrooms who don't install do know installers in the area. So they can always give you a referral if you don't have your own installer, for sure. And there are also several workrooms out there who do install. I know a husband and wife team. The husband installs, the wife does the draperies. So it's really kind of a mix, but your workroom will always know an installer to refer you to if you need one.
And if I can say, if you're looking for an installer, ask a workroom, or obviously ask your other designers too. But in our years of doing this business, we have come across some fantastic installers, and we've come across some not so good installers. So the workroom can actually tell you what installers not to use. So
and the workroom can often, as we do, collaborate with the installer, where the designer doesn't need to be a part of it. Where I say to the installer, I always leave little notes on my final product saying, hey, face fabric will ripple with steam, or you might want to do this when you hang it. Like, we always leave little notes for the installer. And if he has an issue, he'll call and say, hey, well, how did you do this? What's the best way I can do this? And so we work together with the installer out of earshot of the client so that any potential issues are worked out. And a good installer knows exactly how to work out issues when he's installing draperies. Yep. He's very, very valuable.
Okay. Any other questions?
That's great. Thank you. Well, there is a question. I'm not sure. I was going to hold it a little bit more to the end because it's about how do you find a good workroom, and that's from someone who is out of state. That's someone who doesn't have the luxury of being in Connecticut, but is quite a distance away, and is wondering how would she go about finding a good workroom.
That's a really good question.
Actually, do you know what state they're in? Only because we can actually put it out to our forum board and ask people like what's a good workroom in X state, and we've done that before. So
we'd be happy to get you a referral. In general, finding a good workroom, I think really it's a matter of the way that designers find us. It started as word of mouth, and it started with Brian networking, but basically the designers, you want to go to the workroom's actual workroom, see their operation, and talk with them, because not all personalities are going to match, even if the workroom does a fantastic job. What we've found is that communication is paramount, which sounds fairly easy and sounds obvious, but a lot of designers and workrooms, some people just don't mesh, So generally, I would recommend going out, interviewing your workroom, so to speak, and letting them interview you too. It's a two-way street. Yeah. And the way you would find an actual workroom to go out and talk to, I would say, is you could talk to other designers, or go to a place like Design Source, CT, where they have all the fabrics that are for designers only. I'm sure there's several in New York or wherever you happen to be located.
She's in actually Ohio, in the Cincinnati area.
I imagine that there is probably a design center out there somewhere, or you could call a fabric dealer. They probably know workrooms in the area because they market, as we said, to workrooms. So you could get some names from a fabric representative or a fabric vendor, and then you could go and interview a couple of workrooms that way.
That's a really good point.
That makes sense.
Talk to fabric vendors. They will know the different workrooms in the area. So, all right.
That's a great idea.
Good. I hope that's helpful.
Any other questions?
That's it so far.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to run through this really quickly because I know we're short on time. So, how your workroom can help you sell window treatments. You can. Obviously, we talked about new products. I want to talk about the last two here. Really, personalizing the work. Like, if you are comfortable with, during an in-home consultation, if having the client meet the workroom or the workroom representative, it can really kind of personalize that project for the designer. We know that there's at least one designer whose client has met Rachel, and absolutely loves her. I can't see why not. And we'll ask the designer, hey, is Rachel going to make this window treatment? So that has helped them actually sell. And also, people these days love buying local. Really push that. I know some of the designers, that are in the Farmington Valley, or like Ethan Allen's store, I know that's in Canton, which is the next town over. They have told their clients, yeah, it's being made right here, in the next town over, by a small local workroom. This is not being shipped out of state, but you're literally putting money into your community. So it can be a very powerful tool in selling window treatments, or any custom furnishings. So we found that to be designers have found that to be very effective. And lastly, this is just a summary, what a collaborative workroom does, helps you anticipate issues, manage your clients' expectations, can increase your business growth, by avoiding those mistakes, and really, helping you to get the best product to your client. So, I know we're running short on time. Just 2 quick things. If you have any questions after this is done, please don't hesitate to contact us. If you have hardware questions, fabric questions, even if you're using another workroom, we love talking to people and brainstorming. So, give us a shout, shoot us an email. And also, if you're active on Instagram or Facebook, shoot us your Facebook page or post, or what your name is, so that we can follow you. I love reposting designers' work. We're pretty active on Instagram right now, and we've been, reposting designer stuff, giving credit, obviously. Another way your workroom can help you sell, if they are active on Facebook or Instagram, send them photos, and they can put it out to their social media network. We've been doing that with one of our designers sent us photos of London shades. We put it out on Instagram, and they got some good feedback. And so it's just another avenue that we can help people kind of grow their business.
This is just wonderful.
Oh, I hope you guys all found
I hope it was helpful.
Thank you for taking the time out to listen to us.
This is just wonderful. And if I could just put a real quick plug in,
Sure.
I believe that you are offering some really good prices on some custom pillows and maybe tablecloths, or did I get that wrong, Brian?
No, you are absolutely right. We are actually we've got right now a 3-week turnaround for all pillows during this holiday season. We're looking at some really competitive pricing right now. And also we are, for the first time, doing a accent table. We're making it an accent table that's made for a tablecloth to be sold as a set. A round kind of accent table that can be a side table, or maybe you put it near a window, with a chair, so it can be a little reading nook.
Or for Christmas, you could use it as a dessert, table or
exactly,
something.
Yep. So yeah, we make the table so it's sturdy, but it's fairly inexpensive, and then you customize the tablecloth. So something that we're getting some good feedback on. Sorry.
And that also is a 3-week turnaround for Christmas.
Yes, and that's also a 3-week turnaround as well for the holiday season.
Thank you, Ann.
I was going to say plenty of time for the holidays. Well, thank you. Thank you both for being with us. I think this is just wonderful information. And
it was our pleasure.
I will just reiterate, if you have any questions, contact Brian. He is Johnny on the spot. And we'll get back. And Rachel, it's such a pleasure to speak with you as well. Thank you for your time, and thanks to everyone for listening to our webinar. We hope this was beneficial to you. So good night, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you again.
Thank you, and good night.
Take care.